Good evening, everybody. It is 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is a beautiful day in Brooklyn, New York. My name is Max Cohen. I'm the lead writer for the Museum of Crypto Art, and this is the Mocha Live podcast. I'm joined by a very special guest today from all the way in the music NFT world. We have Jeremy Stern, founder of Catalog. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Max. Thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah, this is I mentioned just before we started, but I've been following you from afar through a mutual friend for quite a while now. And I'm really interested in kind of talking about NFTs that aren't visual art NFTs, which has my heart because I'm a writer. And outside of some like crypto art poetry, there really isn't any kind of writing on the blockchain. There's been some experiments, I think, with putting books on the blockchain. I know Judy Mam of Dada.art did a book on the blockchain. And there, I don't remember kind of what the idea of it was, but there was some book that the people at Lit, do you remember Lit? It was like that coin that came out for a bit, the Robert De Niro face. They put out a book from someone, but not a ton of, I think, institutional experimentation with artworks on the blockchain that aren't visual arts. Now, I know a little bit about the music NFT world just because of some names I'm familiar with. DJ Skrilla, who we have a piece of his in the museum's permanent collection. I believe he was the first person to encode audio onto an NFT. And then people like Eclectic Method and Latasha, who I believe was one of the artists who helped launch Catalog and Studio Nouveau. But admittedly, I want to talk less about the business side of NFTs today. And I really want to talk about like NFTs that don't benefit from scarcity, right? That's like, I think the crucial underpinning of crypto art right now from the visual art side is this problem that everything that is value driven is deriving that value from scarcity. So first and foremost, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. In our earliest writings and sort of public communication around Catalog and why collecting crypto media in general was important, but specifically music, we were pointing a lot to this essay from someone named Mackenzie Wark called "My Collectible Ass," which largely sums things up. Can be summed things up as the future of collecting may be less so in collecting the thing that nobody else has, but in collecting the thing that everybody else has.
Mhm.
Everyone in NFT land loves to point to the Mona Lisa as the sort of holy grail of this example, where the image is extremely ubiquitous. It has massive cultural relevance. There are endless copies and remixes of it, but none of those, all that distribution, those copies, those remixes, don't detract value from the original. It actually adds value to the original painting hanging in the Louvre. So, with regards to music, it is a bit of a different medium in terms of the way that we consume it. Unlike visual art, where you can just quickly look at it and instantly get an idea of everything going on there, music takes time to sit with. And like any kind of artwork, there is a lot of context behind music that in today's world with DSPs is very much lost in the ocean of just sort of quick consumer, quick to consumer, like playlisting, background listening, etc., which there's very much a place for. But yes, with music in particular, it is interesting because there is this existing value model around the music industry that has been established for quite some time. And we could talk endlessly about some of the reasons why that pay-per-play model, valuation model for music has not had the same kind of outcomes that we might hope for. But one of the biggest potentials and promises that we saw when we set out to put music on chain was that music can be both extremely widely available and effectively free to listen, which it is now, but also valuable to own. And so a lot of the thesis behind that original essay was basically saying, the more culturally relevant something becomes, the more impact it has on the world, the more ears it touches, the more hearts it touches, the more valuable that digital original has. And music as a medium, it's been collected in physical forms for many years. It largely shifted to be digital in the past 20 or so. And as that has continued to evolve, we have almost lost ways to value music as an art form. It's just become this like we said, pay-per-play valuation
Yeah, it's
model.
like a consumable, right? It's like it's content.
Exactly. But, there's no reason why music shouldn't be able to be valued in the same way that an original painting can be valued.
Stop it there because I love the idea of the Mona Lisa. I think it's obviously it's ubiquitous, but any kind of painting. Let's say I don't know who donated the Mona Lisa to the Louvre, or let's say there was an individual who donated it to the Louvre, right? Showing it there and then having it be reproduced does create cultural value for all of the involved parties, right? For the institution that displays it, for the artist, of course, Da Vinci, for the collector kind of down the road, or whoever donated the piece of the collection, or showing the piece in the collection. With the music NFTs specifically, and I'm going to use music NFTs, I think, in this conversation as kind of a stand-in for all of this like more public-minded art, right? Which I believe includes literary NFTs, or like literary art, literary mediums, performance art or theatrical art, music, all of these things which benefit from the same kind of cultural exposure, but which don't have such an, I think, easy metric by which to gauge the principal parties like growing cultural relevance, right? So if you own the masters of X song, right, you're going to benefit as if like you're the quote unquote museum that's holding the Mona Lisa. And if that song becomes incredibly highly played, then of course the artist is going to benefit. The platforms that are selling that art are going to benefit. But in the NFT world, where you're not purchasing the masters, right, you're purchasing kind of, especially, and I would imagine that this applies to all of the NFT kind of mediums that I mentioned before, you're not buying the master, you're buying kind of an artifact that points towards your belief at a place and time. So, which is almost like describing value to being like a hipster, right? To being ahead of the curve. I'm curious, like, I know that you've seen people be interested in collecting these NFTs, but what is their underlying motivation? Like, what are they seeing when they're coming to purchase these NFTs? Being that they're kind of outside of that traditional, like middleman, producer, artist kind of triumvirate of like, I don't know, cultural value receivers.
That's a great question. I think there are many, and it depends on the individual collector, and potentially even the person they're collecting from, or the specific song they're collecting, or NFT that they're collecting generally. A lot of people in the space like to take this kind of investment angle and speculative angle, as is the nature of NFTs generally, and I think is what, with any kind of crypto cycle, draws people in. It's this idea that, oh, I'm seeing other people make money doing this. So whether that's me as an artist looking to put enough money in my bank account to maybe quit that second job, or as a collector to, hey, I can speculate on, instead of speculating on white papers and DeFi protocols, or random shitcoins, I can speculate now on music and art that I think is really incredible and has the power to change lives. So for some people, I think there's the speculative nature. For many, I think, especially with collectors we talk to, and in the realm of one-on-ones, there's a lot of talk around this notion of patronage plus, which was coined by Jesse Walden, which is basically the idea that you are collecting a piece of artwork, but it's not so much with the intention of just flipping it for a profit down the road, although that in many cases is possible. You're collecting with the notion that, hey, I'm directly supporting this artist on chain. I'm forging this relationship on the blockchain with them that shows that I'm an early supporter of this person. I enjoy this specific piece or the work that they are doing generally as an artist, and I want to help bring more of that into this world. And maybe if that artist continues to do so, they continue to proliferate and make more and more, bring more and more incredible things into this world, that there might be some return on that investment down the road. But many collectors, especially on catalog, don't necessarily come in with the expectation that, like, hey, I'm going to flip this for 2x, 3x, 5x down the road. Although there are those people who are kind of searching for who is that X copy of NFTs and how can I get in on those early ones.
Well,
I think ranges.
I've been involved for some months now in interviewing a lot of crypto art collectors to try and get to the bottom of like why people invest their money in, visual crypto art, but like these kind of this liquid asset class, right? And I have an essay coming out tomorrow about kind of the personal relationships that the collectors form with the artists, and how meaningful that is to a lot of these collectors. I think it's underrated. I mean, I don't think it's underrated. I know it is completely like overlooked, that there is not always a financial motivation with a lot of this collecting, that it is in large part being a part of the artist's journey in some way, shape, or form. A, because you love their work or it's been meaningful to you. B, because it helps you to express yourself in your own collection. I think another thing we underestimate is how much collecting assets, especially blockchain assets that are public, are a way of expression that is available to people who may not have training or confidence in specific art forms. And then, of course, also because may know the person, you might be friends with them, you might see their kind of online persona, you might really jive with, you pick up what they're putting down, so to speak. There's so many more reasons to kind of put your money where your mouth is than just wanting an investment.
Totally. You can almost
Yeah.
think of it as like a super like, in a sense,
Yeah,
on a
sure.
platform where it's like, it's not just your average run of the mill. Hey, I'm showing the minimum amount of support and maybe maximum that this platform offers. But I'm really signaling with my money and with my wallet that this is something I care about for some reason or another.
Yeah, totally.
For each person, I think it can totally vary what that reason is.
We've seen some like more performance artists, I think, come to prominence recently in crypto art. I'm thinking of Una, who we've had on the show before. There's an Australian artist named Violet Bond. I think he's a New York-based performance artist named David Henry Nobody. But all, they do these performances, and you're buying these NFTs, but those NFTs aren't really, they're not the performance itself, right? Which are very visceral and very bodily, right? They're recordings of that, or documentations of that performance, which was going on in the world at some place at some time. But again, it's still just kind of the documentation of the thing that people are interested in. It's not necessarily the aesthetics of that art itself or the comprehensive, I don't know, ideology of what's within the frame. It is all the things, the context that the frame itself represents. And I imagine that performance or anything kind of theatrical, especially with music NFTs, maybe one day with literary NFTs, that's kind of what you're purchasing as well. It's like a flag stake on, I don't know, this kind of like important feeling or all the context that has gone into the creation of this thing. Yeah, I want to move on, but any thoughts on that before we do?
Yeah, I guess I just want to shout out CXY, who is both a builder and collector in the space, comes from, having worked in the music industry and is also an avid music fan, who has been speaking quite a lot about and even working with artists to help document more of their creative process and put that on chain. So rather than just kind of showing the final result, adding more, like telling more of the story behind the artwork, recognizing that to many people who are large fans of those artists, that that is also an important piece of the process that they value. And
Definitely.
even just to get a peek behind those scenes, regardless of whether you're collecting or not, I think is cool.
Oh yeah.
But
I mean, I watch a lot of sports, and like the announcers, the broadcasters who I think have the most like universal approval and who people are most interested in are those who are going to take you like under the hood of how the game is actually played. The Tony Romos and the Greg Olsons in the football world, or the Jeff Van Gundys in the basketball world, like these guys who have tons of experience playing or coaching the game. And it's so, I don't know, there's something almost intimate about seeing how the sausage is made at like the highest levels, which you just really can't get. Something I've always been jealous of with other artists, because writing that process is not interesting at all.
totally, yeah.
With,
And it's sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say the process of writing, it's terrible. It looks terrible. It feels terrible. It comes across terrible until the moment at which it's done. Um, Musicians, artists, I've always had a deep loathing for them. Because the process itself is sexy, it's cool, it's appealing, and it shows something about the art.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think there's you could maybe draw some parallels here to like Patreon and the kinds of experiences that a lot of artists put into Patreon, the things that they offer behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of similarities there that you can draw from in terms of, oh, there are people who value uh, those peripheral offerings.
Mhm.
But I think one of the coolest things that blockchain brings in that didn't really exist before that is that, oh, suddenly those relationships, those experiences, that documentation not only gets to be, sort of imbued into the fabric of the internet itself, but also you kind of you get to have your name attached to those things. And I think we, over the pandemic, tons and tons of artists, like musicians specifically, were streaming on Twitch, and we got to see quite a lot about how much individuals, fans, value simply just recognition from an artist. And so
Mhm.
to put that relationship on chain, to put that recognition on chain, I think is a powerful step in the right direction, because it just opens up uh, a whole can of opportunities that
Definitely.
didn't quite exist before.
There's this wonderful crypto artist named Omani LaRussa who's she's just like an incredible digital artist and is like a wizard with her actual technique. And she has this whole TikTok channel where she takes people through the actual process using programs that I don't understand and can't name. But yeah, it's fascinating even for me, like a layperson with no technical artistic ability whatsoever, to kind of see that process. So I want to move on quickly to kind of the structural problems that both crypto art and this music NFT ecosystem are trying to address, right? So crypto art was not like founded with an intention. Obviously, it kind of evolved, but over time, I think a lot of the things that characterize it today are things that were invented to address structural issues in the art world itself. Data.art famously like encoded artist royalties on pieces using smart contracts in 2017 for the first time in their Creeps and Weirdos collection, and thus artists could make money in a increasing amount if their fame were to increase and their pieces were to turn over, which was revolutionary. Crypto art's focus on provenance keeps like this seedy world of like backworld art deals from being totally behind closed doors. And then, of course, and to me, this is the most important thing. It's just the nature of blockchain itself. It's that even if you want to buy artwork and keep it safe, it doesn't disappear from the public eye the way that a lot of physical art does, where you purchase it and then it's just gone. It's in a warehouse somewhere temperature controlled and safe with security, and it loses its ability to be art and it just becomes, I don't know, an idea. So I want to quote, I'm not sure if it was you or perhaps a co-founder, from an interview y'all did with Fox with it. And the quote is, "For over a decade, we've watched the same irrevocable problems continue to plague the music industry, from convoluted ownership structures to a broken and unsustainable streaming ecosystem. We need disruptive new models that give artists more autonomy, control, and earnings in distributing their work." So I guess my question is about catalog, of course, but it's also more about the larger music NFT kind of ecosystem. Like, how have you, together with like Zora or Audius, etc., how have you like collectively tried to start addressing these problems? Because obviously, not one entity is going to be able to do that. It's going to require this like multi-pronged approach of different builders coming at it from different angles.
Mm. There's a few things to unpack here. One is sort of like the provenance and cataloging of putting media on chain. And there's been a number of cases in the past that you can point to, like MySpace, who lost years worth of music due to some server bugs, where that music just simply no longer exists
Yeah.
because that was the only place it was uploaded. Artists who pass away or are unable to afford their SoundCloud subscriptions, and that music disappears. Um, Other platforms deleting old content. Like there's no shortage of cases where we can point to where we say, oh, there is this valuable thing that existed only digitally on the internet that was then removed because of uh, the centralized powers that had control over it.
Mhm.
So like one big step forward even is just to simply put something on chain where it can be, live there forever, and have that attached to a digital signature from the artist who made it, is already a value prop in general before you even get around to the monetization side of things.
Mhm.
Um, so that's one piece of a problem that we aimed to solve when we first kicked off. But yes, I think the sort of if I'm understanding correctly, one of the things you're getting at is the issue around secondary royalties being honored, around.
Well, I think that's a vital kind, or I know it's still kind of being fought over by parties of various levels of, shall we say, investment in the future of this ecosystem. Um, but I think it's like it's a really crucial underpinning to anybody who's been here for a while or been building in the NFT world or is an artist who is creating things here. Um, So yeah, it was just, to me, that's like the emblem of structural disruption. There's obviously um, other aspects of it, but to me, that's the most comprehensive, especially because it's snaked out from where it started in the visual art world to now touch music NFTs and kind of touch basically anything that's being minted on the blockchain has this um, idea of royalties as at least a possibility.
Totally, that was a massive unlock for the art world, period, and a huge draw for artists entering the space for the first time, who are interested in dabbling with it, saying, "Oh, if my art can appreciate in value over time, that's something that I can share in. That's upside that I won't be totally locked out from." And then as things evolved over time, with sort of like marketplace wars, we started to see that promise fade a bit more and more, and suddenly people will realize, oh well, there's always kind of been ways around this. One of the things
Mhm.
we discussed early on was like, well, what if someone just does a kind of behind like a backdoor trade where they just send someone the NFT, the other person sends them money, and that was always a way to get around that. And one of the things that we were leaning on in those early days was this notion that, well, you're actually taking a reputational hit if you're
Definitely.
if you're conducting transactions like that. That as a collector, whether you're anonymous or not, um, there is reason that artists would not want to have their work in your hands if you are the type of person who's not going to honor the maybe not hard encoded rules, but um, expected rules of the system.
Yeah,
And
it's very Confucian in essence,
yeah,
right? That like the civilization will respect the social norms as long as the civilization is, ready to uphold them or to shame those who don't uphold them. Uh,
yeah. So I think is more like on-chain reputation has become, from what I've seen, like more of a conversation recently, and I
mhm.
think that's something that's going to continue to proliferate. Um,
What's made you say that out of curiosity? Like
well,
who's been talking about this or what's got
like
your
two,
interest?
two projects that come to mind off top are Rabbit Hole, which is kind of like they run things called quests, which protocols can partner with them to basically say, hey, we'll offer some rewards for you to do these on-chain actions.
Mhm.
And another one being a JPEG, with sort of a curation protocol where you can add different pieces of NFT art to registries that correspond to different categories of collections, or have some other kind of contextual meaning.
Mhm.
Um, and the idea there is that like your on-chain actions are reflective of the value that you are bringing to these individual apps or protocols. And uh, that's something that can easily be traced on chain, but it's not something that has been very well indexed or surfaced or utilized beyond things. So I mean,
What's
there's certain examples where you could say like that are maybe more simpler and more common, where to say, oh, you get an airdrop for this project if you've done XYZ on chain. Um,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't be surprised to see projects going forward that say, oh, well, if you've ducked royalties from my NFTs in the past, then maybe you're gonna have to pay a little extra in order to mint this one. Or
Mhm.
if you've honored my royalties in the past, maybe I'll give you a little something extra in addition to this mint. Um,
Sure.
so
I
I mean,
mean,
we'll maybe too soon to see how those kinds of things shake out, but it is one uh, tool that we have in the on-chain ecosystem um, to help nudge behavior and create incentives for people to honor the ethos of secondary royalties.
sure. Anything else that you guys do at like catalog specifically that is nudging people in that direction as well?
For sure, yeah. So we are currently built, at least our front end is built entirely on immutable Zora marketplace contracts.
Yeah.
Um, they've gone through a few iterations, but none of them are upgradable, such that uh, they are all supporting royalties set by the artists for every catalog record until the end of time. So whenever you buy something on catalog or list something on catalog, um, those royalties will always be honored for those artists.
Sure.
Um, now that doesn't stop someone from going on OpenSea and listing it and ducking the resale royalty, but um, you know we can point back to the previous discussion we just had around like the reputational hits that come along with that. We do
Yeah.
encourage everyone to use catalog and Zora's marketplace contracts for that reason, so that they're honored. Um, and we're talking in the context of one-on-ones here. Um, Other projects have taken other approaches where they're kind of like their UI just inputs the royalty amount for you, so you don't even have the option as a user to
Mhm.
set it lower. There's other projects and marketplaces that are working towards creating more incentives for honoring royalties too, like the latest version of SudoSwap has some cool
Sure.
mechanisms for this. And I think also too, there's like if you go past one of ones and look towards additions, there's other levers you can pull here um, to help ensure that the volume and trading hands of NFTs still is putting money in the pockets of artists. For instance, bonding curves being a useful mechanism for that. Instead of selling, kind of over the counter to another party, I can just sell directly back into a curve.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
the artist will, the liquidity is there already. I'm going to get the sort of discovered market price for that. So that's one way. Another interesting mechanism, which I'm a big fan of, is when an artist is creating a collection of editions, you can set aside a certain amount of the supply for yourself. So I think Manifold and Zora both have variations of this where you can either say, okay, every, say, 10 or 20 NFTs minted, one is going to go directly to my wallet. Or, hey, I'm going to mint this with a supply cap of 100, but I'm going to save 10 for myself.
Sure.
So like, these are all different ways where you can still maintain upside in maintain upside in the value of your art as it changes over time without having to worry as much about the resale royalties being honored across marketplaces.
Sure. So when artists are coming into this kind of musicians rather are coming into catalog or the broader music NFT like ecosystem, do you find that most of the time there are people who have had exposure to blockchain or crypto, etc. beforehand? Are they kind of disillusioned and just looking for some way to disrupt the paradigm that they've found so far? Like, what is the value add, not just of catalog, but of this, of like integration into this ecosystem that these musicians are seeing that's drawing them in?
That's another great question. And I would also say that it varies from musician to musician
Of course.
and from collector to collector. For
Mhm.
instance, like Dutchy, who's a massive user of catalog and has put up a ton of his back catalog there. He's been a producer and an MC and rapper for a number of years, and he's he's told quite his story, which I won't go too much into here. You can check it out on his Twitter and in his writings. But a big value prop for him in putting his music on chain is the provenance of it. It's saying, hey, even whatever happens to me, 5, 10 plus years from now, this music will still continue to live on, and I won't have to worry about even if catalog goes under, that will still continue to exist. So that alone is simply just putting your music on chain for the provenance purposes
Mhm.
is a value prop for some artists. Now, obviously, lots of other artists, especially those outside of the space, don't care as much about that, or at least they don't right now. With many crypto products, I think, again, one of the biggest draws that gets people interested in this stuff in the first place is making money and speculation. And in the music industry, there is currently like no shortage of artists who feel a bit undercut for good reason due to the structures that be in sort of the Web2 music industry. Artists are making on average about 12% of all the money that goes through the music industry, which
Mhm.
feels a little bit imbalanced to me.
Sure.
And so when we think about, what is it about this tech that is important to these people who are using it, or at least the prospective users of this, at the end of the day, technology is just a tool for solving problems. And when you look at the problems that exist in the music industry today, you can
Mhm.
say instantly, oh, well, transparent, trustless, like permissionless payments are a huge leap forward for the music industry. Even just being able to withdraw your money instantly is like a massive leap compared to the kind of black box that holds money um, in the music industry today.
Yeah.
Um, so, the way that we tend to think about things is like, there are lots of problems to solve, and it just so happens that like blockchain provides incredible tooling for addressing those problems for musicians, for collectors, um, and yeah, it's not. I wouldn't say it's so much like we're a blockchain company because we just want to use blockchain for stuff.
Mhm.
When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
It's truly it's truly like a 0 to 1 moment in terms of, oh, we can actually create systems that are completely block out the ability for, or at least largely block out the ability for bad actors to come in and screw people over the way that they've been getting screwed over.
Definitely.
Decades.
What one thing that I think is lacking in the NFT world in general, but I think especially in NFTs that aren't like visual first, is platforms in which to actually experience the work. This has been spoken of by me and by many others, especially even in like the visual art world, right? Where you have this wonderful piece of art, but it's being squeezed into whatever screen you're physically seeing it on, usually like a phone screen or like a laptop screen. The aspect ratio is going to be wrong. It's going to lack the grandeur that it needs, right? And anything to kind of regulate that problem, whether it's projectors or there are some screens that you can like cast things to. Those are, from what I understand, very expensive and very technically like difficult to use, and also they don't always work very well. Um, you extrapolate that out past visual NFTs to something like literary NFTs, for instance, right? There are some like NFT poets or crypto art poets like Sasha Stiles and Ana Maria Caballero who have figured out ways to manifest their poetry in an NFT form. But I think poetry has a lot more in common with visual art than it does with anything we're kind of talking about here. These things that kind of need more than initial impression or, you know, one page or one image to be experienced, right? Whether that's music where you're going to need a couple minutes or a book where you need extensive lengths of time and to physically navigate through it, right? You know, you can use a music player, you can have a MetaMask branded music player in your wallet, but what kind of controls is it going to have? Is it going to have crossfade? Is it going to have speed up and slow down? Like, is it going to have the artists, you know, the sourcing of who did the writing and who did the producing and things like that? Like all of these things I think we take for granted on the platforms with which we experience this art, what you get naturally from reading a book on Kindle, it needs to somehow exist within this sphere so that the art itself can be experienced in even something close to its truest sense. So, you know, is there a short or long-term way to address this problem? Or are we kind of all in the visual art world, in the literary world, music world, all kind of waiting for advancements in the kind of integrative tech that would be necessary? And I think that's a completely valid answer. I'm just curious your opinion on it.
No, it's a great question, and I think it's fascinating the angle that you approach it with around. Well, if we look at poetry, it's one thing. If you look at longer form media like books, it's another. Versus JPEGs, versus movies, versus music, versus everything in between. Social media posts for even, and now, these can all live in the on-chain containers that we know and love today and call NFTs. But the way that we experience them, that we discover them, that we like to show them off, can manifest in, you know, endless different ways that I think we're only still kind of sweeping through the mud to discover. And I think music is an interesting example here because there are very well established systems for listening to and discovering music today that have that completely neglect whether or not the music is on chain.
Yeah.
There are more Web3 like native solutions that focus on the listening and discovery and collecting experience of these things. I think Future Tape and Spinamp are both good examples to look towards here, where they're just aggregating music from all these different places. Ooh La La is another one. But at the end of the day, you know, there's a question of is the bet that over a long enough time span, as more and more music finds its way on chain, our user behavior is going to change from listening to and discovering music on DSPs and continuing to, you know, do that there, and then kind of jump out to different websites to purchase the NFT. Kind of like as an antidote for me, like I'm a huge user of Bandcamp and Discogs.
Sure.
And,
yeah.
You know, my main way of listening to music is I'll discover it someplace on the internet, be it SoundCloud, Bandcamp, a mix that was put up on YouTube, what have you. And then I'll go and find that file, usually through Bandcamp, sometimes somewhere else, and I'll download it and I'll put it in my like personal iTunes computer, and that's where I do most of my listening. And in that case, I'm purely just using Bandcamp as like a tool to jump out and purchase the thing that I'm looking for, and then I go right back to my normal habit of music discovery. So some things, I think at least for some people these days, the main value prop that they are taking advantage of with Web3 apps, at least in the case of music, I would say maybe in the case of writing as well, like with Mirror, and maybe some of these other mediums that you've discussed. It's kind of like the storefront to acquire these things.
Sure.
And that's our main relationship with those assets at the moment. Is I collect it, it sits in my wallet. Maybe I flip it. Maybe if there's other perks for it, I can flip some knobs and do something with those NFTs as well. But for the time being, a lot of these places are effectively storefronts. We think of Catalog as a record shop, where you go through and browse for records, kind of like you're flipping through vinyl, looking through crates until you find something you like, and maybe you take it home. But over time, I do think that the experience, as more things move on chain, there's going to be increased interest and demand. Like we're already starting to see it today, but there's increased demand for places where I can show off my collection of a certain kind of thing, akin to like a shelf of vinyl at your home, or a bookshelf, or the clothes in your closet. You want ways to display and show these things off. You also want ways to consume them. So maybe I have a listening room in my home where I put those vinyl on from time to time. But yeah, I guess there was forever this tension, I think, between there's this growing, budding space of consuming on-chain media. Depending on what that medium is, it has different ways that it wants to be consumed or discovered or shown off. And it's constant, and that media can also, and oftentimes does, live in the more traditional like Web 2 internet space. And,
sure.
They're constantly, it existing in one place or another doesn't tend to have a strong effect on the value of it living in either place.
We always have to have that bifurcation, right? It's like artists who are trying to have their music played as much as possible, but are also, giving or offering like meet and greets to a very small subset of the population, right? That is going to not only be interacting with their music in a, audio sense, but have like a really deep connection to it. When there is this kind of greater adoption for, the blockchain or music NFTs in general within the industry, do you think it would have to come from the artists, or do you think there's a world in which consumers themselves looking for new ways to form relationships with these artists would kind of push the industry forward?
That's a great question, because a lot of collectors that we've talked to, or even people who are prospective collectors who are just interested in the space from afar, one of the most common questions we get is, well, what am I actually buying when I get a music NFT? I think that's partly because music already has this existing value model around it that people are so used to. So people think, oh, do I get a share of the royalty, like Web2 royalties for it? Do I get any publishing rights? Do I get something else in addition to it that gives me more reason or to buy it, that gives me more value out of it, which we don't really see as much in visual art collections outside of maybe some promise to like be in a community. A lot of people have accepted the notion that, oh, I am collecting this for the art and I just get the NFT. But to bring more people into this space, one of the things that I do think needs to happen is the sort of like mental and narrative shift around the value of owning a piece of on-chain music. While I'm totally down for the experimentation happening with giving people perks for collecting these things, I think there's tons of cool stuff happening and no shortage of artists to look to who are playing around with those levers. For me, I still think like one of the most powerful unlocks of this technology is to allow music to be valued as art in a way that wasn't previously possible before. And then you can build any kind of supplemental experience you want around that if you so desire. It shouldn't be like this hard requirement. Otherwise, we're kind of going back into the game of, oh, well, everything in the music industry that people pay for are things that are peripheral to the actual creation and consumption of the music itself. And most of the money, whether it's like through merch or tours or whatever else, while I love those things, I love buying sample packs on Patreon and supporting artists in different ways. a lot of the money in the music industry isn't actually isn't actually, in direct support of the music itself, if that makes sense. I
Sure. Yeah.
went on a bit of a tangent there. I might have lost the original point, but
No, totally. I love where you went, and it was making me think of just our relationship to music in general, and our relationship to what I am kind of conceptualizing as like publicity minded art forms, right? Where as much exposure to the public as possible at all times is desired, and wherein the original copy does not have specific value to the consumer. I was watching The Sopranos last night, and it ended an episode with a song by the Kubas. I've been trying to make you love me, which is not on Spotify. And for me, when something's not on Spotify, there's like a moment where I kind of get this whole, you like see the narrative, right? Okay, why isn't this on Spotify? Well, there must be a problem with the rights. What happened with the people who wrote the song or their families? What aren't they? Obviously they don't enjoy the business model, or there's been a decision made. Like that whole narrative kind of opens up.
suddenly
And
you're like, how much do I actually like this song to go out and listen to it in a way that's less convenient for me?
but it also, in a sense, makes that song scarce in a way in which it wasn't scarce before. I cannot bring that song into my library. I cannot just have it in my life wherever I want it. Now, I don't have a deep relationship with that song other than I thought it sounded great, and I'd like to listen to it again. But one can see the idea that if there is at any point some kind of an exodus from streaming, that you said DSP, right? That's what you're calling streaming platforms, digital streaming platforms. If there's some kind of exodus because of, in the same way that like the WGA and SAG unions are on strike because they just are not enjoying general industry practices, I'd be interested to see if there is this kind of scarcity that would develop amongst music, that it can no longer just be listened to. So I wonder if people would kind of revert to this structure where they're viewing this again as a scarce asset. I don't think literature can ever really have that, because so much of literature is printed and it just exists unless there's mass book burnings, which I mean there have been, and you obviously do have rare books, but usually it's like rare copies of the book, not like the content itself. I don't know. This makes me think of a world in which the blockchain is not affixed to music NFTs or any kind of public-minded NFT as the central paradigm, but as something like peripheral that helps with the search and discovery, that helps with the access, when this totally unfair paradigm that we have now inevitably comes to blows that are going to impact the consumer, just like with streaming, where for 12 years we were all completely spoiled by the glut of shows and movies that we could watch for very cheap all the time. And now we're slowly seeing that peter away until the point at which it either becomes prohibitively expensive or is taken from us altogether. There's a question in there, and I'm hoping you could just pull it out so that I don't have to now land this plane.
I mean, there's a few thoughts that come to mind for me, and they're all pretty salient. One is that, like, internally at Catalog, we sometimes refer to our mission as like creating this library of Alexandria for music, but one that you can't burn to the ground, like one that we don't have sole control over as the people building the infrastructure, but rather it's there, it's permanent, it's for everyone to access and discover until the end of time, and it's built on these rails for value exchange, or you can run all kinds of cool experiments for putting more money in an artist's pocket, helping them to live more autonomously and on their own terms. So that's kind of one piece of it for me. The other is, I think people especially not in the crypto world, don't tend to give much thought or care towards the permanence and the existence of their data or other data that they care about on the internet. And it's only when there's these sort of nuclear scenarios where suddenly they realize, oh shit, like I could lose, if my Twitter account gets banned, suddenly I lose my entire history and social graph there. If when there's a MySpace bug, all of a sudden all those demos that my band had recorded and uploaded over the last decade are completely gone. Those are those kind of wake up moments for people where they say, oh, this is a real problem, and it's not something I really thought about up until now when it started to affect me or someone or a neighbor of mine.
We talk about that a ton with the metaverse, where like the data that you would need to theoretically enter the metaverse in any kind of comprehensive way is so invasive and so all-consuming to your personality, and your mental health and all these different secondary triggers. And the idea that if you were to leave Facebook's metaverse for a different metaverse, they would own whatever you had there, right? Your history, your social graph, your name, your all of the, again, data about your neurodivergence that they had collected over time. You then would not be able to take that with you. They somehow own these markers of your very identity that you've digitized.
It's a terrifying thought, and
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a dying breed on this one. But when it comes to sort of collecting music, in the non on-chain sense of the term, like since probably sixth grade or so, starting with like iTunes and my iPod Nano, and CDs to now, I download all my music into iTunes, so like locally on my computer, and then back it up. Um, and it's not realistic in my opinion, but it's also not impossible. The idea that some of our favorite DSPs will not continue to exist in 5, 10+ years from now,
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm
or
tethered to Spotify. Like I just the nature of having all this music that I love there and having my playlist there, they hooked me early before I kind of really understood what I was signing up for.
yeah, and it's
And
useful. Like there's a million good reasons why, as a listener, it's like that's the move. But
mm,
I like to joke that when the apocalypse hits, that I'm going to be trading USBs of old Frank Ocean albums to people
sure.
for dinner every now and then.
If
Uh,
anything is going to be valuable at that point, it will be USBs of Frank Ocean albums.
yeah, exactly. It's like when shit hits the fan, whether it's you're on a flight and they don't have Wi-Fi, and you didn't download that latest album that you saved on Spotify or for whatever reason, that it's there's some comfort that I receive from knowing that like I have all these files locally, and that if they disappear everywhere else where I would normally be used to getting them,
Mhm.
that they exist somewhere that I can access them. There was a lot of slightly tangential, but like a lot of artists, especially in kind of the golden era of SoundCloud, would just go on these upload sprees, and every day or every week they're just putting out tunes that they had just cooked up from their DAW, and it was just this like beautiful time for experimentation and almost this like musical renaissance where people were just experimenting with different genres and riffing off of each other. But so many of those artists have then gone on and removed those tracks for whatever reason, and a lot of those tracks were so special to people. It was like maybe they weren't up for very long, or they were, and it just gained all this notoriety, and then they disappeared to the point where there's now even accounts where they are purely like archival accounts for
Mm,
artists. Like a fan basically starts up an account that says like
yeah,
Mr. Carmack Secret Gems, and all the Mr. Carmack tracks that he took down off his own profile usually find their way up onto this alternate profile.
sure.
Long-winded way of saying, there's a lot of amazing music out there and content and media out there that we take for granted will continue to exist, and a lot of times it ends up not existing. And so the blockchain is putting that media on chain, is one very effective way to ensure that doesn't disappear on us without ample notice.
I think that that's an incredible point and a wonderful place to start tapering off our conversation today. Um, One thing I will do, and what I like to do before I end, is talk about sports for like a minute and a half. You care about sports at all, or should we just skip that altogether?
Very loosely, I'm like I don't properly follow anything. I'm the kind of so I grew up in the Bay Area, and then went
Mhm.
to college in Boston, and currently based in Denver. And I feel like I've just been blessed with winning.
Seeing a lot of championships.
Yeah, like Giants, Warriors, Red Sox, Pats, and now the Nuggets and the Avs. As for someone who doesn't follow this stuff very closely, it seemed to be like have a little bit of a good luck charm there. But I know I love watching. I love going to games, even though I don't go very often. It's exciting to me, but I can barely name any players these days.
Fair enough. During the basketball season, this becomes like a 5 or 6 minute like vent session about the Celtics. That Colborn, my co-host, just very tangentially just either lets me peter myself out of, or kind of throws me a ping pong ball that I hit back and forth to myself again and again. So,
I wish
anyways,
I wish I could
well,
riff more with you there. The only things I could maybe offer is I played a lot of NBA, like, so was it NBA Live 07, 08. So I was just obsessed with like, oh my God, Yao Ming is so tall, or look at Sean Marion's 3-point shot. That's ridiculous.
now you're talking my
But,
language.
yeah, but I haven't kept up too much.
Fair enough. Well, the risk of alienating further listeners with the talk of people like Sean Marion and the other 07, 08, like all stars. Let's wrap up here. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on today. This was an awesome conversation. I'm looking forward to listening back and getting all this insight, direct. Any last words for the people before we kind of get on out of here?
Nothing huge. Thank you so much for having us on. I love what y'all have built with Museum of Crypto Art. I think it, in the spirit of a lot of the things we were talking about in this conversation, I think it aligns quite nicely with y'all's mission, and especially us as like a curated platform, and looking to shine a spotlight on music or cultures or genres that might not otherwise have a have ears and wallets on their work in the Web3 space. It's cool to have some alignment there.
For sure.
Yeah, we've been on the catalog front. We've been doing some long overdue facelifts to the site that just improve the listening and discovery experience, and creating a bit more network effects there, and scheming a bit more on ways to lower the barrier of participation. Right now, one-on-one record, which kind of commands a higher price point as the digital original, isn't in the sort of price range for a lot of people, even in the Web3 space today. So we're working towards systems for lower cost value exchange on the platform, which I'm very excited about,
Cool.
as well as sort of new layers of curation and listening and discovery that don't really exist anywhere in the space today, but I think complement the natural offerings of blockchain and Web3 infrastructure nicely. So still we're cooking pretty deep right now. Don't have any timelines on stuff, but really excited about what's coming next. And in general, just want to thank everyone for listening to this podcast and for being a part of our journey. It's just really special to us to see people who find amazing music on our site, who support artists, and then go to see those artists, form relationships with those people, go on and create more incredible art, and sustain themselves over time.
Well said. You can follow Catalog at Catalog Works. No UE at the end, just CATALOG Works on Twitter, or visit them at catalog.works. That's it, just catalog.works.
URL, yeah.
That was Jeremy Stern. I'm Max Cohen. This has been the Mocha Live podcast. I got a cat who's scratching against this chair, so it's probably time to go. We'll be back next week at 5 p.m. EST with some more conversation. Good times. Please subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them from other platforms, tell me. I don't know any others. And we'll be in touch. See everybody next week. Take care.
Cheers, all.